Hi everyone and welcome to a new video. As well as a new setting, I had to change locations because the lighting was just too bad over there. But definitely let me know if you prefer actually this location, so I will film from here from now on. But that's not what the video is about. I would like to review The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum today, or Die verlorene Ehre der Katharina Blum in German by Heinrich Böll. Now I will link as always my written review down below, as well as the English version, as I have the German version here, as well as a review by my dear friend Silje, who made a really great talk on this book as well. I think in her early days on her channel, and it's really a fantastic video. You should definitely check it out. I personally came across this book in a German class as we studied it, and I loved it ever since. So this is a reread, but it didn't lose any of its impact at all, if not gained, because the first time I read it, I wanted to get into the journalism field, and reading such a novel has a deep impact for someone who wants to go in this field. And surprise, surprise, I no longer want to work there, maybe in art or culture journalism, but not journalism in general. But so I could look at this novel with a more critical view, but it really didn't lose any of its impact on me. So what is The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum about? Sorry. It's the story of said Katharina, who is a 27-year-old young woman who works as a housekeeper for the Blum couple. She's an architect, he is an advocate. So, and Katharina one day meets this charming, young, good-looking man called Ludwig Götten at a party of her godmother. Now, the problem with Ludwig Götten is that he is suspected to have committed bank robbery as well as murder and even terrorism. Spoiler alert, he did not commit all of those crimes, but you will have to read the book to find out what exactly he did commit and what not. So they basically fall in love at the worst time possible. And what happened, and this story is what happens after this association of those two people, and it's basically ruining Katharina's life, because a certain tabloid reporter or reports bring her to the edge of her sanity, as well as the very biased police investigation. Now, this leads her to commit actions, or one specific action that goes beyond anything she thought she was capable of committing. I personally think to understand this novel or its brilliance, better you have to get some background informations. And to get everything right, I have my notes down here, so if I look down, it's just because I don't want to miss anything. So, Heinrich Böll was a German author who is famously known for linking political events in his writing, as well as, for example, critical outlooks on public institutions such as the church, for example. Böll saw authors as admonishers who needed to get their political viewpoint across, and therefore help to connect people more and show everyone what the mistreatments in political systems during his time were. An important thing to note in regards to this specific novel is his constant feud with the Springer press, Association. He was actually part of the group Gruppe 47, an organization who worked against or boycotted the Springer Press because they worked against some student movements in Germany during the time of the German division. He is also known very famously for his article on Ulrike Meindorf, and she is, as some of you may know, a famous member of the Baader-Meinhof complex or Baader-Meinhof group, also known as the Red Army fraction, which is or was a West German far-left militant group which is responsible for many acts of terrorism. Bell simply argued in this article that they need, or to give them, or Ulrike Meindorf in this case, a fair trial, or a trial in accordance with the rule of law. And therefore he was falsely accused to have connections with the far left. What followed is that the press suspiciously had known details of this investigation that could, at the moment of the publication of the reports, only be known by the police. And those facts inspired Bell to write this novel. So it's heavily autobiographical. It's very much inspired by Heinrich Bell's life. Autobiographical. Now I have it. Autobiographical. Okay, that was a difficult word. It's heavily inspired by Heinrich Bell's own experience with the press. Therefore, you might ask, why did he choose a female character instead of like a male character, because he is in fact male. And I will get into this point later on, but I think another one is that he didn't want to put too much of himself into this story, as he did with other works as well. He always used a character to present some parts of his own story. Now, to make the connection between his experience and the press to this novel, I want you to read, or I want to read to you the quote from the preface of this novel. I will read it in German first, and then I will read it in the English translation. So for those who read German will understand it the first time around, and the other will understand what I want to say in the translation. So, the preface says, Personen und Handlungen dieser Erzählung sind frei erfunden. Sollten sich bei der Schilderung gewisser journalistischer Praktiken Ähnlichkeiten mit den Praktiken der Bild-Zeitung ergeben haben, so sind diese Ähnlichkeiten weder beabsichtigt noch zufällig, sondern unvermeidlich. Now, the English translation, I wrote it down here. The characters and action in the story are purely fictitious. Should the description of certain journalistic practices result in a resemblance to the practices of the Bild-Zeitung, which is a famous German newspaper still going today, such resemblance is neither intentional nor fortuitous, but unavoidable. So what he's trying to say with that is that he does not have a choice to portray these journalistic practices other than the ones from the Bild-Zeitung, because they are so similar and so both very cruel in their fashion of working. Now, to me, as you can already tell, this work is nothing short but a literary masterpiece, and I think a lot of it has also to do with the writing style of Heinrich Bell, because it's like unapologetically German in its like dry and very detailed analytical fashion, which makes me really question if it works as well as a translation. That's something I always wondered reading it this time around, because there are so many hints of sarcasm in here that I'm not quite sure if a translation is able to pick that up. Now, what is unique about this story is not only the writing style, even though this is a massive part of how this story works and is built upon, but also how the story is presented, because the reader is from the very start like confronted with what Katharina committed. She in the end of her journey through through those horrific events killed this tabloid journalist, and we know that from the very beginning. And it's basically like the book tells like the investigation told from this narrator point of view, which is an outsider, and he tells us from different sources, inspired by different sources, this story. But we know from the very start what happened in the end. We know the murder committed by Katharina, and we somehow through the book get her motives and what happened before, and I think it's really interesting. And Heinrich Bell, in his like afterword, he really wants to hello, some dust flying around. The dust really wants to come in as well, but Heinrich Bell really wants to show the subtitle of this novel, because it actually has a subtitle as well, which says how violence develops and where you can lead. And by violence, he by no means Katharina's actions, but rather the journalistic practices, the violence of journalism and where that can lead. And therefore this is the focus of this novel. And there are 4 major critiques built into this story, and the first one is obviously the most obvious one, the critique on the press. Bell was very passionate about bringing to light these horrific journalistic practices he witnessed himself, and the uninformed biases, mainly towards the left, not just the far left, but the left in general. And he was especially furious about that. So he wanted to show the practices used by the tabloid press. So it was very applicable for his time, but it can still be applied today, in my opinion, can be applied for reports from the tabloid press today. Another critique that is closely linked to this critique on the press is the critique on, as well as on with Bell's personal life, is the one on the practices of public authorities, especially here the police. Bell mainly critiques the close relationship between the police and the press, for example through these informations that were used by the Zeitung, the newspaper portrayed here, to get like this witch hunt set on Katharina. Those are informations that could only be transferred to the police, to the press by the police. Different towards the critique on the different than the critique towards the press. Bell is willing to acknowledge that not everything the police does is bad, and he understands certain actions but critiques others. Then the two critiques I'm personally found most interesting are firstly the one critique on the church. Now, Katharina has been distant with the church for basically her whole life, so we as the reader are brought at a distance from the very start, and this creates an instant distance with the church, which is like prefaced more as the priest from Katharina's town is the only person who was quoted correctly of saying those horrible things about Katharina. So he's the only one quoted correctly in the newspaper. All the others were like twisted and turned around. So in this critique on the church, Bell focuses mostly on the lack of standing up against this injustice happening against Katharina, and even helping to spread those rumors by those accusations of the priest. Now, my most favorite critique in this book, I actually only just realized that this time around as a reread, because I was not really aware of that when I first read it for class, because it's Bell's critique on the double standards of society. First, we know that Katharina is often called the nun by people around her, by her friends, neighbors, etc., because she appears very distant with new people, especially male encounters, and therefore is called the nun. And throughout the story we see her basically be called the slut, and those changes really come all out of the sudden, and especially the men in the story, and really truly every man involved, also like the friends of Katharina, have a very uncomfortable, in my opinion, way of looking at Katharina basically as an object. And here comes the point of it choosing a female instead of a male character, because Bell clearly shows these imbalances through the name giving of the character. Katharina, for example, means the pure, and Blum can be seen as a reference to Blume, which means flower in German. Then on the other hand, we have, for example, Tötges, which is the tabloid reporter. He has a very rough name, Tötges, and it's hinting at the word töten, which means murdering someone in German. And he also frequently visits the restaurant Goldente, which can be a hint towards his greed and his urge to write false reports, as gold means golden in German, or in English gold is the German word for golden, and ente is, or translated into English duck, is a commonly used expression to hint towards false reports, which basically is all Tötges does. But the novel by no means just smashes the male or the man in the story, because, as I said, it's a critique on the double standards of the society. So he also looks at the women and how disloyal they treat Katharina, and except her grandmother, I think she's the only real stable person in her life. Everyone else acts really disloyal towards Katharina. So it doesn't just focus on the man, but the part with the name naming of the characters definitely is more hinted towards the men, but there's also critique on how the women in the story act towards Katharina. So this was my review of The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum. It is one of my favorite novels for sure. Definitely let me know if you have read it, if you have read it in a translation or in German, because I would really like to know if you got along with the translation, if you've read it in translated ways. Yeah, and if you haven't, please go and read The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum, because you will not regret it and you will certainly get something out of it. So thanks for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye!